Everyone said we were endgame, the perfect couple. And on paper, they were right. I remember the exact moment I knew. We were at a friend's wedding, and someone spilled red wine on my dress. Before I could even react, they had already grabbed napkins, pulled me aside, and whispered, "Don't worry, you still look beautiful." 3 people came up to me that night and said, "Marry that one." So I did. But here's the thing about perfect. Nobody tells you how heavy it is to carry. Let me paint the picture. 6'2", Ivy League degree, but not arrogant about it, the kind of person who would correct your grammar and then apologize for being annoying. They volunteered at an animal shelter every Saturday. Not for the photos. They never posted about it. I found out from a mutual friend 6 months into dating. My mother literally cried when they proposed. Happy tears. She pulled me aside later and said, "I prayed for this. I prayed someone would love you like that." They remembered every anniversary. Every single one. Not just the date. They remembered what I was wearing on our first date. A green dress. I had forgotten until they mentioned it. They planned surprise dates. Once, they drove 2 hours just to show me a field of wildflowers because I'd mentioned once that I'd never seen one. And they never raised their voice. Not once. In 4 years of dating and 2 years of marriage, not a single yell. I used to brag about that. I married the person everyone dreams of. But perfect on paper? That's not perfect in real life. Our wedding felt like a movie. The kind where you think, they made it. They're safe. I remember standing at the altar, looking out at 200 people crying. My dad was sobbing. My maid of honor kept squeezing my hand. The officiant actually said, "This is what everyone hopes for." And for a while, we were safe. The first year was exactly what you'd expect. Road trips, breakfast in bed, inside jokes that no one else understood. We were that couple the one other couples secretly hate. You know the one. Holding hands at the grocery store, finishing each other's sentences, posting anniversary countdowns on Instagram like teenagers. I genuinely believed I had won the lottery. But here's what nobody films. Not the arguments, because we didn't have those. Not the betrayal, because that never came. No cheating. No screaming. No door slamming. No silent treatment that lasted more than an hour. The loneliness. It didn't hit all at once. It crept in like a draft you can't find the source of. Little things. Like the way they would say, "I love you" on their way out the door. Same tone. Same timing. Same kiss on the cheek. Like a script. Like they were checking a box. Or the way we stopped talking about anything real. Not because they shut me down. They never did. But because every time I tried to bring up something hard, disappointment, fear, boredom, they would fix it. Immediately. Cheerfully. "Don't worry, we'll figure it out. You're overthinking it. Let's just focus on the good stuff." And somehow that felt worse than fighting. You wake up next to someone perfect. Someone who has never hurt you on purpose. Someone your mother cried over. Someone who remembers the green dress. And you feel invisible. Because how do you complain about someone who did nothing wrong? How do you say, "I'm lonely," when everyone sees a fairy tale? This is the part one didn't believe existed. Not the disaster. Not the tragedy. Just the quiet, suffocating weight of someone being exactly what they're supposed to be, and still not feeling seen. That didn't start in year 1. It started in year 2. Year 2 started like any other Tuesday. They made coffee, left a note on the counter. "Have a great day, love you." Same handwriting. Same heart drawn next to the L. I stared at that note for a full minute and felt nothing. Not gratitude. Not warmth. Just nothing. That scared me, because this was the same person who used to make my heart race by walking into a room. And now I was holding proof of their love, written evidence, and I might as well have been reading a grocery list. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? "Hey, thanks for being consistently thoughtful. It's making me numb." That sounded insane. So I smiled, drank the coffee, and went to work. The first crack was small, barely noticeable. We were at dinner with friends. Someone asked, "What's the last fight you two had?" And we both laughed. Because we don't fight. That's our thing. Our brand. But then my friend pressed. No, really. Like a real disagreement. What was it? And I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't want to. Because I genuinely couldn't remember the last time we disagreed on anything more important than what to watch on Netflix. On the drive home, I brought it up. Casually. Isn't it weird that we never fight? They smiled. Reached over and touched my hand. That's not weird. That's healthy. It means we communicate well. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But something about their answer felt rehearsed. Like they'd practiced it. Like they'd been waiting for me to ask so they could reassure me back into silence. Here's what nobody tells you about marrying the perfect person. The pressure to keep up perfection. It becomes a full-time job. Not just for them. For you. Because if they're perfect, then any unhappiness you feel must be your fault. Right? That's the math I did in my head every single day. They didn't forget your birthday. So why do you feel empty? They support your career. So why do you feel small? They tell you they love you every morning. So why don't you believe it anymore? I started performing happiness. Not because they demanded it, but because I couldn't face the alternative that I was the broken one. That I had been given everything anyone could want. And I still wasn't satisfied. So I smiled. I posted the cute photos. I laughed at their jokes. And at night, I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. The second crack came 3 months later. I had a terrible day at work. Not a small thing, a real failure. I messed up a project. My boss was disappointed. I cried in the bathroom. When I got home, I didn't even make it to the kitchen. I sat on the floor by the front door and just broke. They found me there. And they did exactly what you'd want a perfect partner to do. They knelt down, held my face, said, "It's okay. You're okay. We'll fix this tomorrow. Let me make you tea." But here's what I needed. I didn't need tea. I didn't need fixing. I needed someone to sit in the mud with me, to say, "Yeah, that sucks. That's really, really hard. Tell me everything." Instead, they made everything better. Immediately, efficiently, and somehow that felt like being managed instead of loved. I drank the tea. I said thank you, and I never brought up that day again. Because what was I supposed to say? Your kindness feels cold? That would have destroyed them. And honestly, I wasn't sure I was right. Looking back, that was the turning point. Not a fight. Not a betrayal. Just a woman sitting on her own floor, being comforted perfectly, feeling absolutely alone. That's what nobody films. That's what nobody warns you about. Perfection isn't the opposite of disaster. It's the opposite of real. And real is messy. Real is saying the wrong thing and apologizing. Real is getting angry and then coming back. Real is admitting you don't have the answers instead of pretending you do. We had none of that. We had coffee notes and tea and gentle hands and 0 fights and a loneliness so heavy I started missing the sound of my own voice. By the end of year 2, I had stopped asking for anything. Because asking felt like admitting the perfect marriage was a lie. And I wasn't ready to do that yet. By year 3, I had become an expert at hiding. Not from them, from everyone else. My friends would ask how things were going, and I had 2 versions of the answer. The real one, which was, "I don't know who I am anymore." And the safe one, "We're great. You know us. Boring and happy." I always chose the safe one. Because here's the thing about having a perfect marriage. Nobody checks on you. Not really. Your friends assume you're fine. Your family assumes you're fine. Even your therapist, if you're brave enough to get one, will sometimes say, "But it sounds like they're really supportive." And they're right. They are supportive. That's what makes it so confusing. You don't have a villain. You have a very nice, very thoughtful, very consistent person who loves you the only way they know how. And you're standing in the middle of that love feeling like a ghost. I remember one specific night. It was a Saturday. We had no plans, which was rare. They were reading on the couch. I was pretending to scroll on my phone. And I thought I could say anything right now. I could say, "I think I'm depressed." I could say, I don't feel connected to you anymore. I could say, I've been crying in my car before coming home. But I didn't, because I already knew what would happen. They would put the book down. They would look at me with those kind, concerned eyes. They would say, tell me everything. And then they would try to fix it. Make a list. Schedule a date night. Suggest therapy. All the right things. And I would feel even more alone than before. Because I didn't need a fixer. I needed someone to fall apart with me. To admit that they were scared too. To say something messy and imperfect and real. But they never did. And I stopped believing they could. The loneliness became physical. I started sleeping on the very edge of the bed. Not because they snored or took up too much space. They didn't. They slept like a perfect person too, quietly, still, considerate. I slept on the edge because touching them felt like lying. Here was this person who had done nothing wrong. And I was pulling away. That made me the bad guy, right? That's what I told myself every night. You know what's worse than a bad marriage? A good marriage that feels empty. Because at least if it's bad, you have a reason to leave. You have something to point to. Infidelity, cruelty, neglect. I had none of that. I had coffee notes and anniversary gifts and gentle hands and a pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I started Googling things I never thought I'd Google. Why do I feel lonely in my marriage? Is it normal to regret marrying a good person? How do you know if you're the problem? The internet gave me articles about emotional neglect. But that didn't fit. Emotional neglect requires someone to ignore your needs. They weren't ignoring me. They just couldn't see me. And I couldn't figure out how to explain the difference. There was one night that almost broke me. We were at a party. A friend of a friend was going through a divorce. Messy one. Cheating, lawyers, the whole thing. And someone at the table turned to us and said, "You two are like a commercial for marriage. Seriously. Goals." Everyone laughed. We smiled. They squeezed my hand under the table. And I felt nothing. Not pride. Not gratitude. Not even annoyance. Just a hollow, mechanical nothing. Like I was watching someone else's life from behind a window. On the drive home, they said, "That was nice. People really see us as something special." I nodded. Said, "Yeah." And then I stared out the window for 20 minutes while they talked about dinner plans and a work trip next month. They didn't notice I hadn't said a word. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just assumed I was tired. That's the thing about being with someone who never pushes. You can disappear completely, and they'll just call it peace. By the end of that year, I had stopped having opinions. Not because I didn't have them, because it was easier. If they asked where I wanted to eat, I said, "Whatever you want." If they asked what movie to watch, I said, "You pick." If they asked if I was happy, I said, "Of course." I had become a version of myself that fit perfectly into their perfect life. Small, quiet, agreeable. And the worst part? They never asked me to be that way. I did it to myself. Because somewhere along the way, I decided that keeping the peace was more important than keeping myself. That's what nobody tells you about marrying the perfect person. You don't lose them. You lose you. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. Came on a Tuesday. A random, unremarkable Tuesday in the middle of February. They were making dinner. Something simple, pasta, because they knew I'd had a long day. They were humming. The kitchen smelled like garlic. Everything looked exactly like a commercial should. And I started crying. Not pretty crying. The kind where your face crumples and you can't breathe and you make sounds you didn't know you could make. They turned around. Saw me. Immediately dropped the spoon. Came over. Put their hands on my shoulders. Said, "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Did something happen?" And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't say nothing. I didn't say I'm fine. I didn't say just tired. I looked at them. This perfect person with their perfect concern. And I said something I never thought I'd say. "I don't know who I am anymore." They froze. Not because they were angry. Not because they were defensive. They froze because they didn't have a script for this. There was no quick fix. No reassuring sentence that would make it better. No list to make. For the first time in our entire relationship, They had no answer. And that scared them. I could see it in their eyes. The same fear I'd been living with for years. The fear of not being enough. The fear of not knowing how to make someone happy. The fear that behind all the perfection, there was just a person, as lost and confused as everyone else. They sat down on the kitchen floor, right there on the tile, still holding the spoon, and they said something I had never heard them say before. I don't know what to do. Not, we'll figure it out. Not, let me help you. Just, I don't know. And somehow that was the most honest thing they'd ever said to me. We sat on that kitchen floor for an hour, maybe longer. The pasta burned. Neither of us moved to turn off the stove. I told them everything. The loneliness, the invisible feeling, the way their fixing made me feel managed instead of loved. The way I had stopped having opinions. The crying in the car. The Googling. The edge of the bed. I expected them to get defensive. To say, but I was just trying to help. Or, I did everything right. Or, why didn't you say something sooner? They didn't. They listened. Really listened. No interrupting. No fixing. No reassuring. Just their back against the cabinet. Knees pulled up. Eyes wet. And when I finished, they didn't speak for a long time. I watched them process. Watched the perfect partner mask crack right in front of me. Then they said something I will never forget. I think I've been performing too. That was the moment everything shifted. Because it wasn't just me. It was both of us. We had built this thing together, this perfect marriage, this flawless facade. And we were both exhausted from holding it up. They admitted they were afraid of conflict. Terrified of it. They grew up in a house where fights meant broken dishes and slammed doors and silence for weeks. So they promised themselves they would never be that person. And they overcorrected so hard that they became someone who couldn't fight at all. Couldn't disagree. Couldn't sit in discomfort. They told me that sometimes they felt lonely too. That they knew I was pulling away but didn't know how to ask why without sounding accusatory. That they had been pretending everything was fine because admitting otherwise felt like failure. We sat there on the dirty kitchen floor, two people who had spent years performing for each other, finally being real. And it was ugly. And it was messy. And neither of us had answers. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. That night, we didn't fix anything. We didn't make a plan. We didn't schedule therapy. We didn't promise to do better. We just sat in the mess together and admitted we had been lost. And that, just that, was more intimacy than we'd had in 3 years. Because perfection is a locked door. But honesty is a key. And we had finally found ours. That night on the kitchen floor wasn't the end of our problems. It was the beginning of something messier. We didn't wake up the next morning holding hands and humming. We woke up raw, exposed. Neither of us knew how to act around the other anymore, because we had dropped the script and hadn't written a new one yet. The first few weeks were awkward, painfully awkward. We would sit at dinner and just look at each other. No performances, no easy reassurances. Just two people who realized they had been strangers sharing a bed. We fought for the first time. A real fight. About something small whose turn it was to clean the bathroom. And they raised their voice. Not yelling, not cruel. Just loud. Real loud. And then they stopped. Looked at me. Said, "I'm sorry. I don't like that, I just did that." And I said, "I don't like it either. But thank you for not pretending it didn't happen." That was the trade. We stopped pretending. We started therapy. Not because we were broken. Because we had spent years perfecting a language that wasn't honest. And we needed someone to teach us a new one. The therapist said something in our third session that stuck with me. She said, "You two don't have a love problem. You have a permission problem. Neither of you gave yourselves permission to be difficult or disappointing or messy. And until you do, you'll keep living parallel lives." So we started giving each other permission. Permission to be annoyed. Permission to say, "I don't like that." Permission to not have an answer. Permission to be sad for no reason. Permission to admit when the other person hurt us, even if it was an accident. It was terrifying. Every small conflict felt like a test we might fail. And sometimes we did fail. Sometimes we said mean things. Sometimes we shut down. Sometimes we went to bed angry. But we stopped pretending we didn't. Here's what I learned. The perfect person I married? They're still perfect. On paper. To the outside world. My mother still cries happy tears when she talks about them. My friends still call us goals. But now we know the difference between perfect and real. Perfect is safe. Real is scary. Perfect is quiet. Real is loud. Perfect never fights. Real fights and comes back. Perfect performs. Real confesses. We're not the couple we used to be. We're messier now. Louder. More tired. We leave dishes in the sink on purpose just to prove we can. We disagree in front of friends. We say, I'm mad at you, and then eat dinner anyway. And somehow this is better. Because I don't feel invisible anymore. I feel seen. Not because they're perfect. Because they're finally willing to be imperfect with me. So if you're watching this and you're married to the perfect person, or you're about to marry one, here's what I want you to know. Don't be afraid of the cracks. Don't be afraid of the fights that never happened. Don't be afraid to look at the person next to you and say, I'm lonely, and I don't know why. Because perfect on paper, that's just paper. Real is two people on a dirty kitchen floor, pasta burning on the stove, admitting they don't have a clue what they're doing. Real is harder. Real is uglier. But real is the only thing that lasts. Don't marry perfect. Marry real. If this hit home, hit subscribe. I'm sharing more of the stuff nobody tells you about marriage, the real stuff, not the highlights reel. And comment below. What's one thing nobody told you before you got married? I read every single one. See you in the next video.